Now.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to the fourth edition of Minnesota Farm Bureau Shop Talk. I'm coming today from a different side of my shop virtually. Again, full transparency. I have better Wi-Fi in the house than in the shop, so that's just my background picture. It's a really timely topic as we talk about farmer stresses and emotion, because as you can see, or maybe not see on my background, depending with new brake pads and slack adjusters, and even, you know, if I move right, the torch is out. So having the torch out with lug nuts is never a good sign. But want to welcome everybody, and that's really what we designed these shop talks for, is have an opportunity to get information, learn new things, have conversations, but yet get back to work, to the farm or the family and things like that. So really appreciate everyone joining us again this week. A couple reminders as we get started. If you're on the Zoom part of the call, there's a question and answer box. You can use that to raise a question. There's also a chat feature. Feel free to enter into that chat to do that. If you're joining us on the phone, I believe if you press *9, you will be put in the queue to ask a question. And of course, anybody can just raise their hand on the Zoom call as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce our special guest for this week, Congressman Tom Emmer. And it looks a little bit, Congressman, like that's a familiar surroundings behind you. I think Farm Bureau members many times have been in your office and appreciate all you do when we come to DC. So I'm guessing you're coming live from Washington, DC. We appreciate that. And the floor is yours, Congressman, to make some remarks, and welcome to Shop Talk.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you and Amber and everybody else for your hard work. I want to thank you for inviting me, Kevin, to speak today. And yes, I am in my office in Washington, DC. I hope very soon that we will see you and members of Farm Bureau joining us again in our office. Today would have been a particularly good day for you. I got up at 4:30 this morning trying to emulate you and some of your members, and went out for a run, which at my age is not quite the same as it was maybe 20 years ago. But I'm proud to report, happy to report, Kevin, it is like a dog's mouth out there. It is sweaty and wet. I mean, it's the kind of weather that you guys like when you come out to visit, I know. But look, I always enjoy the chance to work with members of Minnesota's incredible ag community. I want to thank everybody for joining this webinar today, for your commitment to agriculture and its success, and I'm going to add, to our American way of life. The challenges facing our world today and our country are unprecedented. The significant challenges facing our agriculture community and our farm families pre-existed the current situation, but have only been exacerbated by the pandemic. Leading up to this year, there was a significant downturn in the farm economy, protracted. And when we were finally starting to see signs of improvement, when we finally had a new trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, when we finally started to break through, it looked like, with some agreements with China, the coronavirus outbreak hit. This crisis has brought a whole new dimension to the already high-stress network, high-stress work that you do. In my opinion, one important thing this outbreak has revealed was the deficiencies in our food supply chain. While we have the safest, most abundant food supply chain in the world, or food supply in the world, we weren't prepared for the unforeseen closures of pork processors, which halted the food delivery system. I've long maintained that the security of our food supply is actually a matter of our national security. As co-chair of the Cuba Working Group, I'm just going to say to all of you, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, we need to look no farther than 90 miles off our Florida coast to see a country that can't feed its citizens and what that means. That's why I was glad to see the president recognize the importance of the food supply chain and invoke the Defense Production Act to keep our processing plants open. The livestock producers in Minnesota and across the country were going to great lengths to delay the growing schedule of their animals to adjust to the pandemic, to the situation. There simply was no way, despite that, there simply was no way to avoid the mass depopulations without obviously getting these plants back open. The coronavirus outbreak has also taught us that we need a plan for the future. If this ever happens again, God forbid, we need to be prepared to respond. This time, Congress had a rapid response in the CARES Act. And I know a lot of people complain about Congress every day and about our inability to get along and work together and get things done. The CARES Act is probably the best example in recent memory of members on both sides of the aisle, despite the significant differences in perspectives, getting together and getting something done. We developed the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, CFAP, and anybody who knows me knows I hate acronyms, knows I look at Washington as the alphabet soup of these programs, but I'm going to refer to it. Nick Lunneberg, who you all know works for me, he's just going to be smiling this whole time, because from here on out, Nick, it's the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. I will refer to it as CFAP. All right. This allocated $16 billion to the United States Department of Agriculture for direct payments to farmers, and $3 billion for direct purchases of commodities, including dairy products, meat, fruits, and vegetables. Our office, Nick, myself, our entire staff, have been assisting operations with applying for the program. So if you have any need, if you need help, I know that your membership, Kevin, covers the entire state, and we have many great representatives, but we are happy to help. And if we can't do it directly, we're happy to help people get to where they need to go. We've been providing feedback as well. So anything you can give us on the implementation of the program, we can actually help communicate that back to the USDA. Now, while only 80% of the CFAP payments have been provided to eligible farmers to date, the USDA expects that the remaining 20% will be dispersed soon. One of the major concerns that I had going into the CFAP's implementation was ensuring that the loss sustained by producers of animals who didn't make it to the processing plants were actually eligible for compensation. I remain hopeful that assistance like this will be included in any agreement that comes out of the ongoing negotiations. Congress, as you know, is working to provide another package of coronavirus aid to help America rebound from this virus and its impact. I'm encouraged to see a variety of the proposals included in both the House and the Senate that will help our farmers stay in business until our country is thriving again. However, my staff and I are always willing to listen to your thoughts or ideas on how Congress can better support those of you who feed and fuel the world. And your president, Kevin Papp, I know will tell you, you can call, you can text, I will respond, Nick will respond. This is a customer service business, and now more than ever, we got to take care of you people, our customers. I want to add that I led a bipartisan group of my colleagues from the Midwest in requesting the administration instruct the USDA to tweak existing programs to allow for compensation of indemnified animals. We started that back in April. I know Nick in our office has been in touch with the USDA in an ongoing basis ever since. After the letter in April, the HEROES Act actually included some language, and the HEALS Act, which was introduced in the Senate earlier this week, actually includes language for reimbursement or compensation on not just pigs, hogs, but poultry and ethanol as well. Now, as the House and the Senate continue their relief negotiations on additional legislation, I'm hopeful that Congress will provide direction to the USDA to make sure that that aid is available for these lost animals, as well as previously excluded sectors of the ag economy, which, as I just said, ethanol had previously been excluded, but it is covered in the HEALS Act. While providing direct assistance is the most immediate way of helping our farm families weather these times, I've also been raising awareness for the long-term and more invisible effects of these difficult times. Even before the stress of coronavirus, the mental health of our farmers and our rural communities was a priority for our office. I'm glad to see Ms. Christensen is here to speak with all of you today. She has been working in this area much longer than I have and has significant educational expertise. I think she will agree that farming presents a unique intersection of both significant stress factors and a lack of access to mental health care. I know she's here to help you all learn the signs of stress in yourself and those around you and share some practical tips to manage the stress and anxiety you experience. I think those are the most important things that can help us to identify people at risk, our family, our friends, our neighbors, and hopefully save lives. This is particularly important because even today, more than half of rural American counties do not have a behavioral health professional. As many of you know, and by the way, that's in the region, as many of you know, I introduced the Stress Act in the previous Congress and fought for its inclusion in the Farm Bill. This will help provide more mental health resources for the agricultural community. And I'm grateful that with a bipartisan effort, we actually achieved full funding of the program. During the increased stress being caused by this corona outbreak, the mental well-being of our agricultural families, our communities, is one of the most pressing issues that we should all be focused on. Too little attention has been paid to the psychological effects on farm families having to cull hundreds of thousands of hogs a week or dump gallons of milk into the field. That's why we recently introduced legislation to increase resources going to stress assistance efforts in ag and expedite those funds in response to the coronavirus outbreak. And I'm happy to talk about all that stuff. But before I end, and Kevin, take whatever time you want to allow for any questions, I want to give you some hope for the future. Out of every crisis comes gain, it should come optimism. It will get better. There will be a better day coming tomorrow, the next day, the sun will shine. And I think when it comes to our agricultural families, our rural way of life, the future is going to be bright. Because what has happened in this crisis is we've all had to learn how to live differently. If you think about the way the country, the world evolved and developed, you know, we created these large cities in response to the agricultural age where we had to bring product and produce into the large cities and move them on waterways, major waterways. Those only got bigger and more centralized when we had the Industrial Revolution and you brought all the labor in from the field and had to have it concentrated in these urban areas. But guess what? The coronavirus has forced us to understand that we might have to advance when it comes to the way we handle telemedicine. We're going to have to advance when it comes to how we handle our logistics. We have to advance where it comes to how we handle education, and the list goes on and on. So for all of you who are on here, I know you're going through a tough time. We're going to try and help with everything we've got on the basics of everyday needs, but think about the future. You are the future of America. We no longer are going to need the centralized, focused attention to get the services that we need. You will be able to treat with doctors not only 4 hours away in major urban areas, but in other states. You're going to have the opportunity to educate your children in a way that you haven't had before. This is going to happen. And people in these positions, if anything has happened, because we're not going backward, if anything has happened, this is going to give us even more reason to push for that build out of that final mile of broadband so that you can achieve all of those things I just talked about and more. And then more importantly, there's a lot of people in these urban areas, they would love to enjoy the American way of life that you do, and it'll give them that opportunity, which hopefully will give us that next generation of farm family and support us all. So thank you for what you do, Kevin. Glad that your guest is here because I know that she's going to offer some really important information, and happy to be part of it.
Well, Congressman, thank you for those comments, and thank you for all you do, not only for agriculture, but Minnesota. It's interesting you brought up Cuba and trade, and although that's not the topic, I think Minnesota has been a shining example of how elected and appointed officials can work. I know you've been very active on the House side. Senator Klobuchar as a senator on a bipartisan basis, and then working with then Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith, now Senator Smith, who has had a trade mission to Cuba, and we do need to work together, whether it's across the aisle with both parts of Congress as well as our state government. So appreciate all the work on that. Amber, we've got time for just one or two questions. Do you have any questions in the queue, Amber? And I can't hear you, Amber.
There we go. Sorry about that. Ran into a technical difficulty. We had a question come through about the financial challenges of the Postal Service. Obviously, that's a key provision for rural Minnesota. I'm reading about possible closings of some post offices in other parts of the U.S. and no overtime for delivery of mail. The U.S. Postal Service is vital for rural America. Will Congress provide adequate financial support for the U.S. Postal Service?
I see it. I'm looking at it, Amber, in the question and answer thing from Paula. First off, the honest answer to your question right now is I don't know. I mean, the negotiations on this current package have stalled. I was told today that we may not be coming back till September, but you know, they say that, and then all of a sudden cooler heads prevail, and you might see this break and start to move next week. We also have about $1 trillion remaining of the $3 trillion that has already been appropriated. And if Congress could give the states more flexibility or direct some of that money to the Postal Service, I think it's a good idea. Paula, you should know that in Congress, I'm an advocate for the Postal Service because what Congress did before I got here, and I had a bunch of our postal guys show up in my office right after I was elected, and they said, do you understand the reason that we run in the red all the time is because Congress has forced us to put 75 years worth of assets away to protect our pension fund? Paula, there's no business ever that has to put 75 years of assets away to support themselves. You wouldn't be able to fund a normal business that way. So I told them at that meeting, the first time that we sat down, if that's accurate, you're going to have somebody who supports you through and through, and I do. I am concerned about it, but it's not just the Postal Service, right? We just talked about programs that are going to be very important to our rural communities and to our farm families. We've got to start getting past, and I love what Kevin Papp just said, because he's so right. This is not about being a Republican or a Democrat today. This is about being a Minnesotan. This is about being an American. This is about customer service if you're in elected office. And I think you got to get over yourself and figure out how to get some of this stuff done, work with your colleagues. So I wish I could give you an answer right now that says, oh, I'm really bullish. I think this is going to happen in the next 7 to 10 days, but I can't because it looks like in the last 24 hours or so, it's really started to hit at loggerheads. And this is what human beings do. They have different desires, different things they want to push. The most interesting thing is that I know that the president, he'll do anything that the House and Senate can get together on. He's game to do, and I'm going to be open about this. I disagree with him a little bit because he doesn't have a limit. He says he wants to do everything that's necessary. Let's get this economy moving together. Let's make sure everybody survives so that we can get them across that great divide when this great economy comes back. Remember, it was at an all-time high going into this pandemic that nobody expected or is responsible for. Let's get past it. Let's get back to work. Let's make sure that everybody out there is positioned to thrive once again, not just survive, but thrive once again. But my concern is, I do think, and this is what I disagree with him on, we got to be careful with the spending. We got to make sure that this is very targeted, and more importantly, that we're financially healthy as a country going forward, and we can literally pay back what it is we're investing in right now.
Well, Congressman, thank you. As you talk about let's get back to work, we better be respectful of your time and let you get back to work as well. We appreciate, again, you joining us today, all you do for agriculture, all you do for Minnesota and Farm Bureau. So thank you for your time, Congressman.
Thank you for everything you do, Kevin. Appreciate it. Amber, thanks. And Ms. Christensen, it's all yours. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Congressman.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It is with a great honor that I get a chance to introduce our next speaker, our keynote speaker, a good friend, a medical professional. You know, and as you look at medical, and I've certainly been involved in pre-hospital care and things in my career, and whether it's farm safety or farm emergencies, whether it's trauma or whether it's emotional, there's a lot of issues out there, and there's just not a lot of medical professionals. There's a lot of medical professionals, but a lot that will say, well, they don't understand farmers or they don't understand farm families. Well, not in our case. And in Minnesota with Cynthia Christensen, not only do we have a medical professional, but we also have someone that understands farmers. She is a farmer, understands farm families. Well, then we say, well, they just don't understand farm groups or don't understand Farm Bureau. Well, Cynthia understands farm groups, understands Farm Bureau. She's our Houston County president. So kind of in my opinion, we kind of hit the trifecta of a medical professional, someone that understands agriculture, someone that understands agriculture leadership and farm groups, Farm Bureau specifically. So it's with a great honor that I can introduce Cynthie Christensen to have a conversation about things that typically farmers, or at least some farmers, male farmers, don't like to talk about a lot, and that is emotions and feelings and things like that. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this program, I've got my 33 millimeter impact socket on my 1-inch air gun, cranked at 150 pounds pressure, and the torch is out. So you know how my day is going emotionally so far. But welcome, Cynthia, and we're looking forward to some thoughts and comments from you, and some question and answer conversation as well. So Cynthia, please.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the opportunity, but I have to say that whenever I'm asked to do one of these talks, I have to remind myself that I can do hard things. And then I spend a fair amount of time trying to figure out what to call it that I'm going to talk about. And to write a couple of sentences that will entice people to tune in rather than scare them off. I also wrestle with what to call my topic. At its core, it's mental health, which people tend to hear as mental illness, which isn't the same thing at all. Do I call it emotional health, brain health, behavioral health, stress management, resilience? The list goes on and on. And what I think we really need to start doing is calling it real. According to the World Health Organization, depression is a leading cause of disability worldwide. They estimate that 264 million people of all ages across the world suffer from depression. More women are affected by depression than men, but severe depression can lead to suicide, which is the 9th leading cause of death in Minnesota. Across the country, depression kills 2,328 people every day. And recently we've been hearing how COVID is unfortunately killing 1,000 people a day. And this is over twice as much, and it doesn't get the attention that the COVID virus is getting. Depression is a clinical diagnosis, and I'm not so much interested in getting people diagnosed with depression, but I am interested in people learning the signs and symptoms of depression so that you can help yourself or provide help to others. And I would just like you to think about the fact that many of you have learned the signs of cardiac arrest so that you can perform CPR. Kevin teaches that routinely. And then we also have learned the signs of choking so that if we're in a public setting and we recognize that, we can perform the Heimlich maneuver. And I would encourage you to learn the signs of emotional struggle and ask the question, are you okay? And by knowing any of these 3 things, you could potentially save a life. And no doubt that when you are in a restaurant and you see someone choking, or you see someone having a cardiac arrest, it is scary to perform those procedures. And you just rely on your practice and your training to do something. So you really have to face your fear and get past that and just try to help. The thing that I think we struggle the most with is stigma. And the stigma of mental health is real. I have talked to many people over the years who are struggling with their ability to cope, what's going on in their lives. And what they really fear is being called crazy. And I use that term because they use that term. And I think, unfortunately, in our social media, the face of mental illness has become those individuals with serious mental illness. I think about the young man who did the shooting in the Colorado theater with bright orange hair, or Jack Nicholson breaking through the door in The Shining. And clearly those people are mentally ill. But this portrayal of mental illness or mental health, or whatever we want to call it, I think really is a disservice and drives the people who are struggling with much milder symptoms into hiding. They don't want to in any way be associated with someone like that. So not knowing where the line is, I think a lot of people just really suffer in silence. And I would like us to think about people like Robin Williams, who suffered with depression, your neighbor or a loved one as the face of depression. We need to be more accepting. We need to learn. And I think what Congressman Emmer said is that even in this COVID pandemic, we're going to learn some things. And I think maybe one of those things that could come out of this is just more empathy and understanding about what it's like to struggle with your emotional health. Because I think universally, people are struggling right now. I just want to say that these conversations about mental health are obviously very fragile. And recently I heard someone share that they were part of a bunch of farmers who were actually talking about their struggles. And which you all know, that's a pretty rare conversation to be had. And it just took one person who said, you know, you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps to just shut that conversation down. And I think many farmers, their bootstraps are pretty worn out. So I would just encourage you that if you have the privilege of getting into a conversation like that, and maybe you don't share an opinion or something, just be careful what you say, because I think we obviously need to be talking about this more. And these conversations, like I said, are very fragile. So stigma is really what keeps people from asking for help. And it keeps people pretending things are okay when they aren't. And people who are struggling with their emotional health get very good at masking how they're feeling. Stigma is fueled by a belief that somehow emotional struggles aren't real. And when you think about just the whole idea of stigma, when you can't take it to the bank, it's not written down anywhere. It's just this feeling, this thought process that has been passed down somehow through our culture. It's fueled by the belief that somehow these emotional struggles aren't real. And in my experience with caring for people who are struggling, if they could pull themselves up by the bootstraps, believe me, they would do it. It's just not that easy. And many people that I care for in the hospital setting, particularly where it's an acute psychological thing happening, they would much rather have a physical illness than a mental illness. You can talk about a cancer diagnosis. You can talk about a knee replacement. You can get support and maybe even get a casserole. But as one of my patients told me, nobody brings you a casserole when you come home from the psychiatric hospital. And I think we really need to change that. I was encouraged by a conversation I had with an elderly woman in my church congregation. And she told me that cancer used to be like mental health is now, that it had a huge stigma attached to it. She called it the big C. And she said, when you got the big C, you didn't tell anybody about it. You kept your treatment a secret. You didn't get any help. Nobody drove you to your appointments. You just suffered along with it. So that the fact that we could get past that gives me hope that we can get past our stigma about mental illness. And I would just say that everyone is different in the ways that they cope. There are many different factors that impact a person's resilience, which is that ability to get through tough times successfully. But everybody, I think, has a breaking point. You know, just the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And I would encourage each of you that is listening to this shop talk to really commit to decreasing this stigma. Asking for help is almost impossible, especially for independent, strong-willed farm folks. Personally, I'd rather shovel out my driveway with a 2-foot snow than call my neighbor who has a snow blower that could just come and do it in 5 minutes. And actually, last winter, during a time that I did actually call him, we sat outside and talked about how hard it is just to ask for help. But sometimes you're the help, and sometimes you need the help, and sometimes you are the helper. So I thought today I would just go through some of the signs and symptoms of stress that you could identify in yourself or others. And these are some signs that you can see. They're behavioral signs. What we think, feel, and do are all linked together. And when you shift one, you shift them all. And as a therapist or a psychiatric nurse, I have to say that I'm never 100% sure what someone is thinking, but I know what they're doing because I can see it. And then I also know that what they're doing is driven by what they're thinking and feeling. So if they're not wanting to get up, obviously they're not feeling good about the day. And if I can just get them to get up and take a shower, that just shifts their thought process and how they're feeling, that behavior. So these are some of the things that we can actually see in our neighbors and ourselves. And the first one is about worry. And as I was doing this talk, I thought, wow, there's a lot of stuff to worry about. But if you are worrying more than you typically worry, that is can be a sign of depression or struggle. And like I said, we've got a lot of stuff that you could potentially worry about. Financial worries about the future. When is this COVID thing going to get resolved? Are you going to make it through it? Worried about getting disease. And they were even worried about having enough toilet paper. And now you can't buy a deep freeze. And I mean, it's just becoming irrational. Another behavioral symptom is loss of interest in doing things that you used to enjoy. If you used to get up and be excited about the day, even just in your profession, that's obviously a sign of good mental health. But when you kind of dread getting up and what the day presents you, or you used to really enjoy going fishing and now you don't want to go fishing, that is also a behavioral sign. Depression can really rob you of energy. Sleep is typically affected, so you're just more tired. And that can lead to just not being able to keep things up. Like you could notice that somebody's grass isn't mowed. And I have to say that these are all differences. You know, if somebody never mows the grass, that might not be a sign, may or may not be a sign of depression, but these are changes typically. Keeping the weeds down, taking care of livestock like they used to. These could all be signs that there's some struggle. Also with depression, it affects concentration, mental acuity. You can get more confused and forgetful. You're just not paying attention in the moment to be able to retrieve the memory. And also that something that comes along with that is just the difficulty of making decisions. Indecisiveness can be a red flag that there's trouble. And again, if somebody could never make a decision before and now they still can't make a decision, that's not a red flag. So you have to kind of keep these things in perspective. Oftentimes with struggles, there are relationship troubles, more fighting in a spousal relationship. The person is feeling sad, down in the dumps. more anxious, which really is described to me as a feeling of dread or doom about the future. Somebody might be more irritable, more angry, their fuse is shorter, and then they're just really negative. Everything is going to hell in a handbasket. And then probably one of the more significant signs that I think is social isolation. People that struggle with depression and anxiety begin to just be overwhelmed with the thought of interacting with others. They're trying to hide what's happening with them, perhaps, and it just takes a lot of effort to be social. And so they tend to isolate. I used to share the story that, you could kind of have a clue if Bob was in the church pew every Sunday and then Bob's missing. The question is, where's Bob? Is what's going on with him, that he's had this change of behavior. But now that we're not going to church, that's gotten even trickier. So we're all kind of isolating. And then also increased smoking, drinking, or using drugs. And I'm really kind of stunned at how much marijuana people are using to cope and manage their symptoms. So those are kind of things to watch out for. And then there's also just some physical signs of stress. And all of this stuff is really not rocket science, but I think it's important to just review. So difficulty sleeping. You can't get to sleep, you wake up in the night and start to worry, or you're up for the day at 3 a.m. and there's just no going back. Also, you could either have a poor appetite and weight loss, or you could have emotional eating. People are talking about gaining the COVID-19. I think that's just symptomatic of the stress that we're under. And then also having stomach or GI problems. People used to talk more, I think, about getting ulcers. And the gut is sometimes called the second brain. So it's can reflect what we're dealing with. And then poor hygiene, not showering or shaving. And then sometimes with anxiety, you can actually feel like you're having a heart attack. If you see signs of these things in yourself, the thing to do is reach out to somebody. And I know that takes a lot to tell somebody what's going on, but you would be surprised at how just letting somebody know is so helpful. Depression can be kind of insidious. One bad day can lead to a bad week, can lead to a bad month, and things can get hopeless. And you could begin to feel like the world would be better off without you. And that kind of thinking really is irrational thinking. It simply isn't true. The world wouldn't be better off without you. But in your state of being, you begin to think that is true, which is really dangerous. If you see these signs in other people, I would hope you'd have the courage just to ask them, are you okay? And then just be willing to listen. And they may or may not tell you that they're struggling, but even by asking the question, you're letting them know that you are a person that they could come to if they really started to struggle. So that's an important piece. And then I wanted to share some strategies, kind of the tools in the toolbox for how to cope with things. And again, these are really not rocket science, but we just don't teach them. So I'll just share some of them with you. A good place to start is with sleep, eating better, and drinking water. It is amazing what focusing on these three things can do for your mood, your energy, and clarifying your thinking, and then consequently feeling more hopeful. Oftentimes as farmers, you come in, you're really tired, and you think, I'm just going to watch 10 minutes of this show. And then you fall asleep on the couch, wake up 3 hours later, and now you've had just enough sleep that you can't really get back to sleep. And then you can just really start to worry. And then, I think sometimes farmers stop in at Quick Trip and get a Mountain Dew and some Funyuns, and that really is not the best thing either. So, you can have those, but if you want to feel better, as a nurse, I don't recommend that. One of the tools in the toolbox is just thinking about control. There are a lot of things in farming that you don't have any control over, but what you do have control over is what you should focus on. I think as farmers, there's a lot of things you've learned that you don't have any control over, like a hailstorm or a wet harvest or corn being blown down. And you kind of, while you don't like it, you somehow can accept it. But I think there are some things in farming that we think we can control, but we really can't. So just clarifying what you're worrying about or what's causing you distress, and just asking yourself, is this really something that I control? And if it's not, you should really try to let it go. This is going to sound way too simple, but just taking a deep breath when you get stressed can be very helpful. When we're anxious or stressed out, we tend to activate our sympathetic nervous system, which is really the fight, run, or hunker down nervous system. And if you can take a deep breath, it just tells your body, false alarm, there's no trouble here. And your heart rate actually slows down, and you calm yourself just a little bit by taking a deep breath. Spending time in nature. And obviously, as a farmer, you spend all your time in nature pretty much, but I don't think we always notice nature. And nature can be really healing if you pay attention. The park systems were developed because they recognized it was important to be in nature. So I would encourage you to appreciate the sunrises, the sunsets, scratch the cows, notice the barn swallows when you're making hay, that kind of stuff. And just be aware of nature and the cyclical nature of it, and how it just kind of goes on. And there's a hopefulness about that endurance of it. Prayer and faith. If you have a religious or spiritual belief, now's the time to practice those beliefs and really have faith in a bigger divine plan. As a practicing Lutheran, I find it very helpful at times just to recite a Bible verse and believe that it's all going to work out. Gratitude. Most of us practice gratitude at the Thanksgiving table when we go around and say what we're thankful for. And you usually say family or food, and then you just want to get on to the turkey. But I'm suggesting a gratitude practice where you actually take an account of what your blessings for that day are. You could write it down if you want to, but you can just think about it when your head hits the pillow. Research has shown that you can shift your mood in as little as 9 weeks with doing a gratitude practice. This is a great thing to get started with your kids. Some people take pictures of what they're grateful for if they don't want to write it down, so that they can look back and have a perspective of that. A gratitude practice can just begin to shift your perspective from a positive to a more positive outlook. And then I also would like to encourage you to put gratitude into action and do something for someone. This creates a good feeling for you, and whoever gets the gift of what you're giving is also feeling grateful. And it can be something as simple as, calling somebody. My dad and his brother FaceTimed recently, and for a bunch of two 80-year-old men, that was pretty good. And they both felt just so grateful by the phone call. And it was just as simple as a phone call. So you could mow somebody's lawn, pick some flowers from your garden, bake some brownies, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but just giving something. I want to say a little thing about anxiety. I think about anxiety as an emotion of the future. Your mind is actually too far forward. You're beginning to think about future events that may or may not, that usually won't happen, but you think they're going to. And then you kind of sort through how you're going to get through it. And it really is an effort in futility. You usually don't think about good things, it's bad things, and you're really just telling yourself stories. So I would encourage you to kind of recognize when you're doing that and stop yourself and tell you that it's just not, and ask yourself if it's helpful. Connecting with others. One of the biggest signs of struggle is when you start to isolate, and if you feel like you don't want to be around anybody. So I would encourage you during this COVID time, even to try to figure out how you can connect with others. Wear your mask, be socially distanced, but maybe drive over to your neighbors with a lawn chair or sit on your tailgate or something, but figure out how you can start to connect. Positive self-talk. What you tell yourself is the most powerful voice you hear. So pay attention to what you're telling yourself. I don't drive a motorcycle, but I've heard that when you learn to drive a motorcycle, they say, don't look at the telephone poles because that's where you're going to steer to. So it's the same kind of thing with your self-talk. Where do you want to be going? You need to be looking down the road instead of the ditch, because it's really powerful what you think. Mindfulness, just present moment awareness, usually by being in your senses. This is a really powerful one when you just feel overwhelmed. Just think about what's going on right in front of you. Kevin, you could practice that with fixing your truck. And because they say that 47% of the time we aren't paying attention to our lives. So if you can think about what you're seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting, it just gets you in the present moment, which typically you can handle. To the women out there, I think that these times are particularly stressful. Oftentimes you're working a job in town to get insurance. You come home, you do the chores. The kids are around 24/7. You're handling the emotion of the family, which is probably pretty difficult right now. You're encouraging your husband if he's a farmer. It's just a lot. And then thinking about homeschooling again in the fall. And I just wanted to give a shout out that there is a resilience podcast course over in the Moses in Her Boots series that you could check out. And then I have to talk about suicide. And who's at the most risk of completing suicide are white, middle-aged men. And the method that they use most often when a suicide is completed is a gun. And this is really sobering for me because when you think about Minnesota farmers, the average age is 58 to 59. Most of us have a gun. And it's just a really dangerous situation. So it's important to learn the signs and symptoms. I've talked to many family members who have lost a loved one to a completed suicide, and 100% of them said they didn't see it coming. So I think that we also, in addition to looking for signs and symptoms, if you're a close loved one of somebody who's really struggling, you need to have the courage to ask the question, are you okay? Are you thinking that life isn't worth living? Because just watching, I don't think is good enough. We need to have those hard conversations. And then just in closing, I understand that seeking help for depression and anxiety just seems insurmountable. I think the average time that it takes somebody to actually call a therapist is 6 years. But I want to say to you that there is treatment for depression and anxiety. You don't need to live a life of struggle. There are techniques that you can learn. All these things that I've shared with you during this last few minutes, they're all free, but you have to practice them for them to be helpful. And I know that there's a handful of reasons why you feel like you can't reach out for help. One of them, I think, is money. You know, most of us have high deductibles, but I would say to you that you pay for a vet when you've got a cow sicker than you know what to do with. You hire a crop consultant, you hire a nutrient manager, and there is no one more valuable than you on that farm, and you deserve professional help as well. Fortunately, in Minnesota, we have 2 therapists that are free, Ted Matthews and Monica McConkey, and they're confidential. You can just call them up. There are resources on the Minnesota Farm Bureau webpage of how to reach them. And I just want you to remember that sometimes you need the help and sometimes you're the helper. And we need to help each other get through this latest crisis in farming. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. That's all great information and things that we all need to think about and help each other with. I will remind folks that you can just raise your hand, put something in the chat box, hit the Q&A box. If you're on the phone, *9. It's sometimes hard enough to talk about this topic anyway. And I know we've got a couple questions in there, but many people just don't like to ask questions, don't want to talk about it. I'll maybe start with the first ask, and that is, what about the times where people think, I don't know what to do, I don't want to say something wrong, I don't want to do anything wrong, so just doing nothing is safer than doing something wrong? How do we approach that attitude? Is, you know, I mean, if I'm going to do CPR, the person is clinically dead. No matter how I do CPR, what I do, right, wrong, indifferent, it doesn't make him any worse. But our concern is, I think a lot of times as we think about mental health, you know, are there things that I could do to be helpful, but are there things I could do to be hurtful? Any thoughts on that?
It's a great question, because I think that is the thing that holds us back, is like, what if I say the wrong thing? But I would encourage people to have the courage to even just say, how are you doing? Are you okay? And you don't have to, you know, you're not a trained, you know, you don't need to have all the answers, but just asking those questions, I think, can be very helpful in just opening the conversation. Sometimes people think that if you have a conversation about, let's say, suicide, that somebody's going to think, oh, I should, that's, you know, that's an idea. You don't plant that kind of idea in somebody's head. It's there not because of the conversation that you are going to have with them. I think this is the thing that we need to do, is have the courage to just ask the question of, are you okay?
And that does get us to questions. Amber, I know we've got a question and a comment, and probably, in my opinion, the most important question that you could ask. If you only had one question to ask, I guess I would rate this one towards the top as far as what is the most important question. So you go to that, please, Amber.
We had a question come in that asks, how do you intervene with someone who believes they can get through this on their own, that they don't need help?
Well, here we get into that stubbornness kind of thing, which, you know, all you can do is offer, right? But I think it's important to offer and let them know that you could help them if they need to. You know, I think it's a process of struggle, and maybe they don't want help now, but if you're having that conversation, who's to say if they struggle worse that they won't come back to you and ask for that help you offered in the beginning? Yeah.
Thank you, Cynthia. You know, we certainly want to thank you for your time this last hour, but on behalf of Farm Bureau members and agriculture, we really want to thank you for your engagement in this topic. You truly are in a unique perspective as a medical professional, as a farmer, as someone in the leadership position in Farm Bureau, and I know we've used you probably more than we should as a resource and a person to, you know, people want to talk about financial and emotional challenges, and again, mental health is not mental illness, but you've kind of always been that go-to person. It's like, this is the person you need to visit with, you need to help us understand this whole issue. So we really want to thank you for that. You spend a lot of time on this. I guess my last, as a closing comment, if you only had 30 to 60 seconds with somebody, a farmer, to talk about this, in that 30 or 60 seconds as you're walking into the co-op or you're walking back to your vehicles from someplace, what would that 30 to 60 seconds be about this topic?
You know, if you're also a farmer, you could have that shared experience conversation. You know, this is going on with me. How is it for you? And even like, you know, how are you getting, you know, what are you doing to get through this? You know, kind of just that collaboration kind of thing. Everybody is so unique. That's the kind of the struggle. And I'm assuming that you know that person. So just having a connection of, I'm dealing with this, how are you dealing with this kind of thing? Because I think universally everyone is struggling, especially in light with the COVID thing. I don't, it's hard to, give you a script, but I think just having the conversation is the important thing. And whatever words feel comfortable for you. There's certain terms that farmers just don't use, like, are you happy? You never say that kind of thing, or, but just in your own language, just having the courage to ask the conversation about, what are you doing to get through this? You could talk about markets.
Thank you for today, for all you've done and all you will continue to do at this very important topic. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Before we end the program, I want to turn it over to Karen Schaefer, our Executive Director, to make a few closing remarks as well as talk about next week's Shop Talk. Karen, please.
And Cynthia, I'll turn it to you. I think you may be something else to add.
I do, yeah. Do you want me to ask? Yep. I have an ask of those people who are listening. There are a lot of people out here wanting to help, but the question is, what is the best way to help? There's a lot of resources, there's hotlines, there's all kinds of stuff. Are there things that people wish they had access to that they don't right now that would be helpful for them? I'd be very interested in hearing from them on what's helpful and what do they wish they had. Thank you.
That's a great point, Cynthia. And if anyone is still able to chat into the comments or add in the Q&A, we'll take a log of that. I really appreciate Amber sharing on the chat section too, all of the resources that were kind of talked through. And I guess my assumption would be, just the more, there are great resources out there, but the more we talk about it, and a comment was made in the Q&A as well about people who you wouldn't think would maybe be struggling with things, Olympic athletes, famous people that seem like they have the world, at their fingertips, and nobody's immune to these kind of feelings or these challenges in life. So Cynthia, it's great to hear from you today. I had the pleasure of working with Cynthia for a number of years in the promotion and education world when I was here previously with the Minnesota Farm Bureau. And I'm so happy that you're able to join us today. Thank you to all the participants. This is the great thing about Farm Bureau. We have such unique leaders and leaders that have just a wealth of experience in all different areas that are not just agriculture related. So we lean on those leaders from time to time. So thank you so much for that. We encourage you, if you're not a Farm Bureau member, to consider joining. Again, this Shop Talk is a weekly session that we're doing here all through August as well. So next week on August 6th, same time, same platform over Zoom. We will be hearing about water issues and talking about that with Warren Formo with the Minnesota Ag Water Resources Center. And luckily, we have a special guest, our American Farm Bureau Federation President, Zippy Duvall. He will be joining us, and we're so happy that virtual platforms are allowing for this to happen. So thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to your comments that you're providing, and then also to join us next week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.